They said I was too different to stand in their wedding photos. Tonight, the entire city will be watching mine. No more back tables, no more shadowed corners. The light is hitting the truth. They hid under beige tablecloths for years. When the stained glass ignites, every instance of "don't show up" and every plea to "don't make a scene" will shatter into 1,000 pieces and reassemble as the final flower on my wedding dress. If they always asked, what will people think tonight? People will think unforgettable. My name is Avery Parker. The high desert of Solterra, New Mexico, is just beginning to wake up. Painting the pre-dawn sky in shades of bruised lavender and pale, hopeful tangerine. My studio's sunspoke glass is quiet, save for the hum of the ventilation fan and the distant, lonely whistle of a freight train cutting through the valley. I am 32 years old, and this is the sanctuary I built, piece by piece, from the ground up. I stood in the center of the cavernous workspace. The concrete floor felt cool beneath my bare feet. The air smelled of metallic flux, sweet wax, and the dry, earthy dust of the desert that always found its way inside. Dawn is my favorite time. It's when the light is honest. It hasn't yet become the harsh, bleaching white of midday. It's soft, inquisitive, and it's when my work makes the most sense. Sunlight, still thin and watery, began to creep over the edge of the mesa, striking the racks of sheet glass lining the far wall. It was a silent explosion. Blues deepened to sapphire. Reds ignited like trapped embers, and the ambers turned to liquid honey. My skin, bare where my tank top and shorts ended, was instantly mapped with the intricate botanical patterns of the panels I'd finished last week. Leaves, petals, and swirling vines painted me in light. A temporary tattoo that felt more like my real self than the person my family expected me to be. On the massive workbench before me, protected by a sheet of homicot, lay the master sketch for Belonging. It was the largest commission of my life, a sprawling, complex piece destined for the new municipal dome downtown, scheduled for installation in October. It was a map of light, a constellation of hundreds of individual pieces that would come together to tell a story of interconnectedness, of finding a place not by conforming, but by connecting. I leaned over it, tracing the lead lines with my finger, feeling the familiar mix of terror and exhilarating certainty. I picked up a stick of white chalk, its powdery texture comforting against my calloused fingertips. I tapped a precise, small mark on the edge of a paper template, indicating a relief cut needed for a particularly difficult curve. It was a habit, this marking, a simple, practical gesture to ensure I didn't forget the small, crucial details. But like so many things, it snagged on a memory. The chalk felt like the way my mother, Vivian, would place a perfectly manicured finger on my arm as a child. A light, cool pressure that meant, stop. Don't overdo it, Avery. That's a bit much, dear. Why can't you just be pleasant? My childhood in Hawthorne Ridge, Virginia, was a masterclass in reduction. I was taught to sand down my own edges, to file away anything too sharp, too bright, too *me*, all in service of the smooth, seamless facade of the Preston family honor. Hawthorne Ridge was not a place for vibrant, fractured light. It was a place of opaque curtains drawn against the sun, of heavy polished mahogany that absorbed all reflection, as if summoned by the thought. My phone, lying screen down on the table amidst coils of copper foil and glass grinders, began to vibrate. The buzz was harsh in the stillness, a mechanical intrusion. I wiped the chalk dust on my shorts and picked it up. An email. The subject line was bright, offensively cheerful, "You're invited, Caroline's big day. My cousin Caroline." I swiped it open, my thumb hovering. The body of the email was a cascade of blush pinks and gold calligraphy. Details of a vineyard wedding, a black tie reception. Standard expected, but I knew to keep scrolling. Past the gift registry, past the block of hotel rooms, past the chipper, "We can't wait to celebrate with you." There it was, tucked at the very bottom in a smaller sans serif font, as if it were a mere logistical afterthought. A private note for our cherished guests. My stomach tightened. No, not for all guests. This was for me, Avery. It read, "We are so thrilled to have you share in our special day. As you know, the aesthetic is very important to us and the photography will last a lifetime. We kindly request that you wear long sleeves to the ceremony and reception out of respect for the venue and the more traditional members of the family. Please ensure any visible tattoos are covered and that your hair color is of a natural shade. We appreciate your understanding." I read it twice. The casual cruelty of it disguised as a polite request. Aesthetic, respect, understanding. They were the same words they had always used the velvet gloves that hid the iron grip. A sudden, sharp montage of the last 10 years reeled through my mind, fast and cutting as a razor. Each frame was a different wedding, a different pastel dress, a different humiliation. The wedding of Aunt Carol and Uncle Steve. Caroline had been the maid of honor. I'd been a bridesmaid. My hair was dyed a mousy brown for the occasion, but my arms were covered in the swirling, intricate patterns of vines and leaves that had begun to bloom across my skin. I'd forgotten to wear a slip beneath my pastel blue bridesmaid dress. The bodice was slightly sheer, and when the flash of the photographer's camera hit it, it turned into a ghostly X-ray of my chest, the dark lines of my tattoos shining through the fabric. Caroline had stood beside me, her face a mask of polite mortification. "Avery," she'd whispered, her voice tight with fury, "what did you do?" My cousin Grant's wedding. I was seated at the table closest to the kitchen doors. The clack-clack-clack of servers punctuated by the distant, muffled toasts. My mother had hissed at me during the cocktail hour, forcing her own beige pashmina over my shoulders in the middle of a 90 degrees July afternoon, not because I was cold, but because the edge of a new design I'd been sketching, a stylized raven's wing, was visible on my wrist in dark ink. People are looking, Avery. Think of the pictures. 24. Another distant relative. The invitation arrived with a separate embossed card. A note on attire, it suggested in swirling script, a wardrobe of neutral tones and hair of a natural presentation. I had spent a week and $200 dyeing my deep cobalt hair back to a dull, forgettable brown, the chemical smell clinging to me as I smiled and smiled and smiled. 26. A family group chat buzzing to life to discuss an upcoming bridal shower. Someone had posted a photo of me from my studio's opening night. My hair a vibrant streak of magenta. My arms bare and inked with the botanical designs that inspired my work. "We cannot let the children see that," one aunt typed. "They'll think it's acceptable." I was not a person. I was a risk factor, a bad influence. 28. My youngest cousin. Before Caroline, I had spent weeks designing a small, exquisite stained glass panel of cascading wisteria as a wedding gift. I sent a photo of the design to my aunt. The reply was swift. "Oh, Avery, it's very bold. Perhaps something from their registry would be more appropriate. Something quieter." 30. A photo surfacing online from the Hawthorne Country Club. A family reunion brunch I hadn't been invited to. The caption read, "The whole Preston clan. Together at last." I stared at the space where I should have been. A ghost edited out of my own life. The email in my hand was not an invitation. It was an invoice, a bill for my presence, demanding I pay by erasing myself. I remembered the night I pierced my own ears with a needle and an ice cube at 12 years old. I had come downstairs proud of the tiny, glittering studs. My father, Arthur Ellison, didn't even look up from his newspaper. My mother saw me and her face didn't fall. It hardened. "Go upstairs," she said, her voice terrifyingly flat. "You are not going to the club tonight." But why? People are watching, Avery. The Prestons do not mutilate themselves. What will they think? I stood there in the quiet studio, the New Mexico sun now strong enough to warm my shoulders. I looked at the email, at the perfectly polite words, long sleeves mandatory, and I asked the question that had been burning in me since I was 12, when did people, this faceless, nameless jury, become the lead director of my life? And when did my own family become their most loyal casting agent, perpetually relegating me to the role of unseen extra? My gaze drifted from the phone to the far wall of the studio. Pinned neatly between two blueprints was the signed contract. The letterhead was simple. Official Sunbelt Arts Trust. It was the agreement for belonging, the public exhibition. My work, my vision, my name. Commissioned by the city of Solterra, to be the centerpiece of their new public plaza. They were not asking me to be smaller. They were paying me to be enormous, to fill a dome with my light. I turned back to the table, my breath steady. I picked up my soldering iron, the tip already hot. I touched it to a spool of silver solder, and then to the junction of two small pieces of test glass on my table. A single drop of molten lead fused them. The sound was a sharp, clean tack a definitive sound. It was not angry. It was not loud. It was the sound of a decision being made. A quiet final click, like a lock settling into place. I put the iron back in its coiled stand and reached for my sketchbook. Flipping past the technical drawings for the dome, I found a blank page. I picked up a charcoal pencil, the lead soft and dark. I wrote one line. Wedding, no compromise, light is the theme. The doorbell chimed, a bright toot toot sound that cut through the morning quiet. I smiled, the tightness in my chest finally easing. I knew who it was. I buzzed him in, and a moment later, Evan called a push through the heavy door, balancing a cardboard tray with two large coffers and a portfolio case. Evan, a documentary photographer, whose entire life's work was about finding the beauty in the things most people overlooked, the cracks in a sidewalk, the rust on a forgotten bridge, the stories in a person's hands. He wore a faded t-shirt and jeans, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he saw me. You're already working, he said, his voice warm. He set the tray down, pushing aside a sheet of opalescent glass. He handed me a steaming cup. I brought light test photos from the plaza. I took the coffee, the ceramic mug warming my hands. I looked at this man, who had spent the last 2 years patiently, lovingly photographing my work, my process, my hands. He had never once suggested I wear a different shirt, or pull back my hair, or dim the color in my art. His presence was a quiet affirmation. He saw the look on my face, the shadow of the email still lingering in my eyes. He glanced at the phone on the table. Hawthorne Ridge, he asked softly. I just nodded, my throat too tight to explain. He didn't need me to. He just held my gaze. His eyes were the color of the desert after a rain, clear and deep and honest. They held no judgment, no agenda, no list of required edits. There was no request in them for me to be smaller, quieter, or more beige. There was only a question, one he had asked me in a dozen different ways since the day we met, and one that I was finally, unequivocally ready to answer. How truly you, he asked, his voice gentle. Do you want to be? Evan's question hung in the air, simple and profound. Asterisk how truly you do you want to be, asterisk the answer was tangled in a decade of images, a rapid-fire sequence of moments that defined my relationship with the people who were supposed to be my anchor, the Prestons, my mother's family, and my father, who had married into their rigid world and become its most fervent defender. The real starts at dinner, always at dinner, the long, polished mahogany table at Hawthorne Ridge. My childhood was scored by the sound of heavy silver cutlery tapping against bone china, a relentless metronome conducting our ceremony of morality. The light was always dim, golden, and forgiving, meant to soften the edges of the room, but it only seemed to sharpen the lines of expectation on the faces around me. My father, Arthur Ellison, would sit at the head of the table, his posture perfect. He wasn't oppressed by blood, but he clung to their code more fiercely than any of them. His mantra, delivered over cock AUVIN, or a roast beef, was always the same: family honor, he would declare, slicing his meat with surgical precision, is more valuable than any individual's fleeting feelings. My feelings were always the fleeting ones. My mother, Vivian, was the family's frantic curator, her entire existence dedicated to managing the Preston image. She moved through every party, every gathering, with a bright, tight smile and eyes that darted nervously, always on damage control. Her entire vocabulary of love was filtered through one anxious plea: Avery, please don't embarrass me. Embarrassment could mean anything: laughing too loudly, wearing the wrong color, or, as I grew older, simply existing in the body I had chosen. Then came the weddings. They were the Preston family's high holy days, the ultimate theater of conformity. Cut to age 22, my cousin Grant's wedding. The reception was at the Hawthorne Club, a place that smelled of old money, lemon polish, and exclusion. I was wearing a perfectly acceptable navy blue dress, but I had spent the previous night testing a new ink for a sketch, and a faint, stubborn filigree of sepia stained my inner wrist. My mother saw it during the cocktail hour. Her face went pale. Before I could even speak, she had retrieved her own cashmere cardigan, a suffocating beige thing, from her chair and draped it over my shoulders, pulling the sleeves down tight. Just until the photographs are done, dear. It was 85 degrees. When we were called for dinner, I found my name card, table 19, tucked in the far corner of the ballroom, directly behind a load-bearing pillar that perfectly obscured the head table. I spent the next 4 hours staring at plaster and listening to the muffled echo of speeches I couldn't see. I was present, but not participating. Seen, but not included. Cut to age 24. Another cousin. Another creamy, thick-stock invitation. This one came with an extra insert, a delicately printed card that read, "We kindly request that guests adhere to a palette of neutral tones. Natural hair colors are respectfully preferred to maintain the harmony of the event." Harmony. That was a new one. My hair at the time was a deep, rich auburn, a shade I loved, but it wasn't the mousy brown I was born with. I looked at the card, then at my mother, who was watching me read it. "It's not a big deal, Avery," she said, not meeting my eye. "It's just for one day." It's never just for one day. It's the slow, steady erosion of all your days. Cut to age 26. The family group chat, a digital extension of the mahogany dinner table. My cousin Miles, Grant's brother, had just had his first child. Photos were being shared. Congratulations exchanged. I was running a workshop for teenagers at the time, teaching them the basics of glass cutting. I posted a photo of the class, all of us wearing safety goggles, smiling, holding up our small, imperfect sun catchers. Silence. The chat went dead for an hour. Then a new message from an aunt, clearly thinking she was in a different chat. "Vivian, are you seeing this? The hair, the clothes. We really shouldn't encourage this. Don't let the children see her page. They'll start to imitate it." I stared at the words, imitate it, as if I were a contagion. As if being different was a disease the children needed to be inoculated against. There was no concern for the kids in my photo. They were having fun, learning a craft. The concern was purely for the image, the prejudice of the adults. Wrapped in the thinnest possible veil of protecting the young, I was a liability to the Preston brand. Cut to age 28. My youngest cousin's wedding shower. I was just starting to get commissions, pouring every cent and every ounce of energy into sunspoke glass. I was poor, exhausted, but I was proud. I couldn't afford anything from her lavish registry. Instead, I spent a month designing and building a gorgeous, intricate panel of stained glass wisteria. It was, I thought, the most beautiful thing I had ever made. I sent a photo of it to my aunt, my cousin's mother. The reply was a phone call, not a text. "Avery," she began, her voice dripping with that familiar, forced sweetness. "It is absolutely stunning. So much color." I waited. I knew what was coming. "The thing is, dear," she continued, "her new home is very minimalist. All grays and whites, and for the wedding, we are trying to be less prominent with the decor. This is it's a lot. It might pull focus in the photos. Pull focus like I was a rogue spotlight threatening to blind the groom." "Thank you, Avery," she finished. "But perhaps something from the registry, a silver tray, maybe." I hung up. I looked at the wisteria panel, the light catching the deep purples and soft greens. I took a hammer and with one clean strike, I smashed the center pane. Cut to age 30. I was scrolling through social media on a quiet Tuesday night in my small Solterra apartment, and there it was. A group photo. My entire family, Arthur, Vivian, Grant, Miles, all the aunts, uncles, and cousins spilling out onto the immaculate green lawn of the Hawthorne Country Club. They were all smiling, arms linked, heads tilted. The caption, posted by Miles, read, "Grateful for this. The entire family reunited at last." I zoomed in. Asterisk the entire family. Asterisk I wasn't there. I hadn't been told about it. I searched my email, my texts, nothing. It wasn't an oversight. It was a curation. They hadn't just forgotten me, they had actively omitted me. I was the piece that didn't fit. The color that clashed, the line that broke the harmony. Staring at that photo, at the seamless, happy facade, I felt a cold, hollow space open up inside me. I was not just different to them. I was invisible. The next day, a private message appeared. It was from my grandmother, Eloise Preston, the matriarch. She was quiet, often overshadowed by my mother's anxiety and my father's dogma, but she saw everything. Her message was short. I saw the photo. "Dear, what a lot of beige. Don't you ever shrink yourself, just to fit in their cramped little frame." A week later, a large, heavy crate arrived at my apartment. No note. I pried it open. Inside, nestled in straw, were her original set of glass-cutting tools, a vintage grozing plier, cutters with smooth, worn wooden handles, a soldering iron that weighed a ton. They were heavy, substantial, and real. Taped to the inside of the lid was a yellowed envelope. Inside was a check for $5,000 and a note in her elegant, shaky script, "Go build something that fits you and make it bright." That was the spark. That was the permission I needed. Not from them, but for myself. The tools were the legacy. But the note was the liberation. I cashed the check. I found the studio space, the one I was standing in now. I left Virginia, and its suffocating manicured lawns for Solterra. I chose the desert. I chose the relentless, unfiltered sun. I chose a place where the landscape was broken and stark and breathtakingly beautiful. A place where, "What will people think?" was a question nobody bothered to ask because they were all too busy building things that mattered. The ink stains on my wrist were gone, replaced by permanent, deliberate tattoos of wildflowers and geometric patterns. The blue in my hair was back, this time a vibrant turquoise at the tips. I had built sunspoke glass from her tools and that first small investment. I looked at Evan, the steam from my coffee rising between us. The memories, sharp as glass shards, settled inside me. No longer just wounds, but material. They were the raw stock I could use to build something new. I took a deep breath, the air filling my lungs, clean and dry. "How truly me?" I repeated his question. I thought of that photo on the lawn, the space where I was supposed to be. I thought of the pillar, the cardigan, the beige. One day, I had promised myself, standing in this empty studio 2 years ago, surrounded by dust and potential. I will not be standing at the edge of the frame. I will be the frame. I will be the light. I looked at Evan for the first time. The promise felt less like a desperate hope and more like a plan. Completely, I said. I want to be so completely myself that there is no room left for their shadows. Evan's smile was slow and certain. He didn't say, "I told you so," or "That's the spirit." He just nodded, as if I'd confirmed a fact he already knew. He tapped the charcoal sketch I'd just made. "Light is the theme," he read aloud. "Then let's start planning the light." That one line, wedding, no compromise, became my new North Star. But before I could build a wedding, I had to finish building my life. Sunspoke Glass didn't begin as the large, buzzing studio it was now. It started with my grandmother's $5,000 check and her vintage tools. The first year, I was running on fumes and sheer stubbornness. I bought a second-hand diamond head grinder that shrieked like a banshee, and a light table with a hairline crack down the middle. My glass inventory was scavenged from other artists' scrap bins. I couldn't afford paint for the cinder block walls, so I spent an evening pressing dried desert ferns and Queen Anne's lace between panes of clear glass, and hung them in the windows. They were my first installations, filtering the harsh white sun into soft botanical shadows. I became a student of my own medium in a way I'd never been in Virginia. Back home, it was a quirky hobby. Here, it was survival. I dove into the physics of it. I spent nights with textbooks on optics, learning how a convex lens gathered light, and how a concave lens scattered it. I studied the spectrum, how a sliver of cobalt glass didn't contain blue, but rather filtered everything else out, leaving only blue behind. It felt like a metaphor for my own life. I wasn't trying to be something different. I was just filtering out the noise of Hawthorne Ridge until only I remained. I learned the language of the materials. How copper foil, sticky and malleable, had to be burnished until it became a second skin to the glass. How the lead came rigid and unforgiving and had to be stretched and coaxed into curves. I loved the way the solder, a dull silver, melted into a perfect, bright bead, sealing the joint, holding the broken pieces together. I'd run my fingers over the finished seams. It was what my family never understood. The lead and copper weren't just functional. They were the visible, beautiful evidence of healing. They were the scars that held the light. My first commission came 6 months in. A small local cafe called Cinder Plus Sage was opening. The owner, a woman with silver hair and hands permanently stained with turmeric, wanted a transom window for her entryway. "I want something that blooms at night," she said. I designed a sprawling spray of Queen of the Night cactus flowers, a cactus flower that only opens after dark. I used opalescent white glass that seemed to glow from within, even in low light, set against a deep nocturnal indigo. When we installed it, the owner just stood there for a full minute, her hands clasped. She turned to me, her eyes wet, and said, "You captured its spirit, not just its shape." She paid me $300. It felt like $1 million. That window opened a door. People started talking. Solterra was a city that valued craft, and the word-of-mouth community was strong. My work was not beige. It was not neutral. It was bold and structural, and it told stories. A year later, the Messer Line Collective, a prominent gallery downtown, offered me a spot in their annual showcase for emerging artists. I poured everything I had into that piece. I called it Desert Lungs. It was a pair of freestanding panels, 6 feet tall, shaped like anatomical lungs, but filled not with tissue, but with the fractal patterns of dry riverbeds, crackled earth, and the tiny, resilient wildflowers that bloomed after a monsoon. It was about breathing in the sharp, dry air of this place, and finding it was all the oxygen I ever needed. Desert Lungs was the first time Solterra truly noticed. The piece sold on opening night. Evan was there. Of course, he hadn't just been my support. He'd been my documentarian. While I worked, he had been quietly, obsessively shooting a photo series. He focused only on my hands scoring a clean line across a sheet of ruby glass, my hands stained with black patina, burnishing a copper seam, my hands calloused and strong, holding a finished piece up to the sun, the light exploding through it. He called the series Hands That Hold Light. It opened in a small gallery the same month as my showcase. People saw his photos and then came to my studio, wanting to see the hands and the glass they made. We were a team, our art forms speaking to each other. The success of Desert Lungs gave me the confidence to aim higher. The city was revitalizing its central plaza, and the Sunbelt Arts Trust had put out a call for a major public art installation. I walked into the meeting with the board of directors, my heart hammering against my ribs. I was 30 years old. My hair was turquoise, and I was wearing my best denim jacket. I felt my mother's voice in my ear, straighten your spine. Don't fidget. Please try to look professional. I pushed the voice down. I unrolled my blueprints. It's not just a sculpture, I explained, my voice steadier than I expected. It's an experience, a dome in the center of the plaza, a place for people to gather under the art, not just look at it. Each panel will tell a story of the diverse communities that make up this city. I called it belonging. They didn't ask me to tone it down. They didn't suggest something quieter. The head of the trust, a sharp woman in her 60s, peered at my designs over her glasses. This, she said, is ambitious. It will be an engineering nightmare. I know, I said. Good art should be. She smiled. Let's talk about the budget. I walked out with the commission. The contract from the Sunbelt Arts Trust changed everything. Sunspoke Glass, the fledgling hobby, officially became Sunspoke LLC. The advance from the city allowed me to buy new equipment and to hire a team. I didn't hire for resumes. I hired for passion. Lena Ruiz was my first hire. She was a master welder who had been working in her father's auto body shop. Her delicate solder work on mufflers and chassis was unparalleled. She saw my work and said, "You paint with fire." I can do that. Her hand was steadier than mine, her beadwork flawless. She became my lead technician. Joy Park came next. She was a recent architecture graduate, brilliant at modular design and CAD, but she had quit a corporate firm because they only wanted her to design beige boxes. She saw the plans for belonging and her eyes lit up. The structural integrity of this is a beautiful problem, she said. She became my designer and operations manager. My studio, once my solitary sanctuary, transformed, it became a hub. On any given day, the air was thick with the resinous smell of solder, the high-pitched whine of the grinders, and a playlist that skipped from old-school hip-hop to classical cello. It also became a haven. A local tattoo artist, covered in ink from his knuckles to his ears, would bring us coffee in exchange for scrap glass for his own mosaic projects. A modern choreographer used the open floor space on weekends to rehearse, saying the light from the fern-pressed windows inspired her. A vegan chef would drop off experiments, spicy beet tarts and avocado chocolate mousse, saying, "You guys get it." People are afraid of things that are different until they taste them. We were a crew of the too different, the too much. We were the people who pulled focus. And here, we weren't just accepted, we were the entire point. I was the COO of Sunspoke LLC, and I was the lead artist. My days were a blur of invoices, supplier contracts, and installation schedules. I was on scaffolding in budget meetings. My hands alternating between a soldering iron and a spreadsheet. I was building something real. And as my world in Solterra became fuller, louder, and more vibrant, the world I left behind grew quieter. The emails from Virginia dwindled. The obligatory, "Hope you're well," from my aunt stopped. My mother's weekly calls, once filled with anxious critiques, became clipped and infrequent. Her disappointment, a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. The family group chat was the most telling. I would see the three little dots appear as Grant or Miles typed. Then nothing. Or they would post plans for a christening, a barbecue, a holiday dinner. My name was never mentioned. I wasn't formally uninvited, I was just omitted. I had become the white space between their messages, the pause they all politely ignored. One night, I was working late in the studio alone. Lena and Joy had gone home. I was stuck on a complex joint for the belonging dome, and my frustration was mounting. I swept a pile of scrap glass shards and broken pieces from miscuts off my table in a fit of pique. They shattered on the concrete floor, a constellation of useless, sharp edges. I slumped down, suddenly exhausted. I picked up a piece of jagged sea green. It was sharp, a weapon, but as I held it, the overhead studio light caught the broken edge, and it refracted, throwing a tiny, perfect rainbow onto my hand. I picked up another piece, a shard of cobalt blue, and another, a sliver of amber. They were all broken. They were all beautiful. I sat on the floor and began to arrange them. I wasn't following a pattern. I was just fitting the broken edges together. A curve of green met the sharp angle of the blue. An amber spear filled a gap. Slowly, a shape emerged. It was a wildflower, a desert primrose, the kind that gets crushed by hikers' boots. But this version, assembled from fractures, was stronger, more brilliant than any single perfect sheet of glass. The light didn't just pass through it. It was captured, broken, and multiplied by the intersecting lead-bound scars. It was more beautiful because it was broken and reassembled. I stood up, a jolt running through me so powerful it made my hands tremble. I looked at the phone, still sitting on my workbench, dark and silent. I thought of the email from Caroline. Long sleeves, natural hair, cover up. I thought of all the words. Too different. Too much. Tone it down. Pulls focus. Don't embarrass me. What will people think? These were not just words. They were not just wounds. They were my material. They were the scrap glass. They were the sharp, broken edges I had been sweeping into a corner my whole life. I walked to my sketchbook and flipped to the page with my wedding note. I picked up my pencil. I could recycle them. I could take their words of exclusion. And like the lead and the light, I could bind them together, transform them, and build them into something new, something that didn't hide the scars, but made them the main attraction. I could make them reborn. The idea of transforming my wounds into art, of turning their words of exclusion into raw material, was still just a spark. It was a theoretical concept, a charcoal sketch in my book. I hadn't yet had to test it. Then, 2 weeks after Caroline's email, the next invitation arrived. This one was not digital. It was a physical object, heavy and imposing, arriving in a box, not an envelope. It was for my cousin Grant's wedding. Grant, the firstborn, the golden boy, the heir to the Preston way of thinking. This was not a vineyard wedding, this was the main event. The invitation itself was thick, creamy cardstock, the engraving so deep you could feel the letters with your fingertip. The script was flawless, but tucked inside, separate from the invitation, the reception card, and the RSVP, was another card. It was not embossed. It was flat printed, stark, and cold. It was titled, Event Protocol and Attire. This was a new level. This was not a gentle note, this was a corporate mandate. My eyes scanned the text, dress code, formal conservative. Gentlemen in black tie. Ladies in floor-length gowns of a muted or dark palette, e.g., navy, burgundy, forest green. We kindly request that guests refrain from displaying visible tattoos or unconventional hair colors to maintain the timeless and respectful atmosphere of the evening. It was a contract, a list of terms and conditions for my attendance. I was not just being asked to cover up. I was being given a uniform. I was being instructed to present myself as a person I was not, in a muted palette to blend into the forest green background of their timeless photographs. I put the card down on my light table. The bright, even light shone through it, illuminating the fibers of the paper. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. The timing was, as always, impeccable. Avery, dear, it read. I trust you received Grant's invitation. It's going to be a magnificent affair. Your father and I are just so proud. I know you'll understand about the attire card. It's just a formality, really. But for the sake of the common good, and to ensure the focus is entirely on Grant and his new bride, it's best we all just fit in. Please do this for me, for the family. It means a lot to us to have you there. Looking appropriate for the common good. Fit in. Looking appropriate. I thought of the Sunspoke studio, of Lena and Joy, of the choreographer, of the tattoo artist. I thought of the community we had built, a place where the entire purpose was not to fit in, but to be yourself. My thumbs moved over the screen. My reply was short. I deleted 3 drafts that were angry, 1 that was sarcastic, and 1 that was pleading. I settled on 1 that was simple, clear, and final. Mom, I received it. I won't be hiding myself for the sake of photographs. I truly hope you all have a beautiful day. I hit send. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I felt clear. The way a piece of glass feels after you've made the score, and it's just waiting for the tap to break clean. The tap came less than 5 minutes later. My phone didn't buzz with a text, it rang. The caller ID read, Miles, my other cousin, Grant's brother, the family's designated peacekeeper, the good cop, the one they sent in when they needed to smooth things over with a casual, warm demeanor. I let it ring 3 times, took a breath, and answered, Hey, Miles. Hey, how's the glass-blowing business? Still playing with fire out there in the desert. It's good, Miles. We are busy. How are you? Good? Good? Listen, I'm calling. Mom's a little spun up. She said you got Grant's invitation, and you're having an issue with the dress code. He laughed, a light, dismissive sound. Come on, Avery. You know how they are. You know how Mom and Dad and Uncle Arthur get about this stuff. It's their timeless thing. It's just one day. There it was. The phrase, just one day. It's not a big deal, is it? He continued, his voice wheedling. Just wear the long sleeves, dye your hair back for a weekend. It's a few hours. We all have to do things we don't want to do, right? It's just family. We want you there. But you have to meet them halfway. I was standing in my studio's small bathroom, looking in the mirror. The fluorescent light was unforgiving. I was tired. There was a smear of black patina on my jaw. I looked at my arms, at the ink of the prickly pear blossoms and the geometric lines I had designed, the lines I was now building into the belonging dome. My gaze caught on a small, pale scar on my right forearm, just below the elbow. It was a thin, silvery line, about 1 inch long. I had gotten it last year when a sheet of antique purple glass slipped from the rack, and the edge of it grazed me. It had bled. It had hurt, and it had healed. It was a real scar, earned from my work, part of my story. They wanted me to cover that. They wanted me to cover the ink I had chosen. They wanted me to cover the hair that felt like mine. All for just one day. I touched the scar, and I realized the lie. Just one day is the most dangerous phrase in the world. Just one day is how a lifetime of erasure begins. It's the small, reasonable-sounding compromise that asks you to betray yourself just a little. It's the beige cardigan in the middle of summer. It's the neutral tones. It's the long sleeves. It's 1,000 small cuts, 1,000 polite requests, until you look in the mirror, and you are not timeless. You are just gone. You are a ghost in your own life, haunting the edges of someone else's photographs. Miles, I said, my voice perfectly level. I can't. It's not just one day. It's a big deal. It's asking me to agree that my natural state is inappropriate, and I won't do that anymore. Not for harmony, and not for a photograph. There was silence on his end. The easy charm was gone. So you're not coming, he asked, his voice flat. Over a dress. I'm not coming, I said. Because I was invited on the condition that I not be myself. But I truly wish you all the best. Please congratulate Grant and his new wife for me. I hung up. My heart was beating fast. I had done it. I had said no. Not with anger, not with a scene, but with a simple, polite refusal. I had declined the terms and conditions. The family group chat, which had been buzzing all week with exclamation points about Grant's wedding, went cold. I could see them, my mother, my father, my aunts, Miles, all online. I could see the 3 little dots appear, as someone started to type and then disappear. The silence was absolute. It was the digital version of being seated behind the pillar. The real blow came 2 days later. It was a leak in the truest, most modern sense. An older aunt, one who forwarded chain emails and inspirational quotes, accidentally forwarded me an email chain. The subject line was, "Handling the Avery situation." My fingers trembled as I opened it. It was a discussion between my mother, my father, and Grant. My father, Arthur, had written, "The line must be drawn. If she cannot show basic respect for the family's image, she has no place at an event of this magnitude." But it was my mother's words that stopped my breath. Vivian had replied, "Arthur, I agree, but we must be careful. If we formally disinvite her, she might retaliate. She is volatile. For the Preston image, it is better that she declines. She is at this point a risk factor. We cannot control what she will do or say. Let her isolate herself. A risk factor. Not a daughter, not a niece, not a cousin, a risk factor. A line item on a spreadsheet of potential social embarrassments. A volatile element to be managed. I sat on the stool in my studio, the email glowing on my phone screen. The sun was setting, filling the room with a deep, blood orange light. I felt cold. This was not a wound. This was a vivisection. They had neatly, calmly, and efficiently cut me out of the family photograph before the camera was even set up. Evan found me an hour later, sitting in the dark. He didn't turn on the lights. He just came and sat on the floor, leaning against the workbench. His presence a warm, solid weight in the room. I read him the email. My voice was monotone. He was silent for a long time. He didn't tell me they were monsters. He didn't tell me I was better off. He just listened. Finally, he said, "They are building their entire event around their fear. Fear of what people will think, fear of a risk factor, fear of a scene. Their ritual is about containment." He stood up and held out his hand to me. I took it. His grip was strong. "So," he said, pulling me to my feet. "Let's build our ritual around our truth. Let's create a ceremony of release, not containment." His words settled me. He was right. This was not just a chess game, this was a battle of opposing philosophies. Theirs was to shrink, to hide, to control. Mine had to be to expand, to reveal, to liberate. I went to my sketchbook and turned to the page that held my first defiant note, wedding, no compromise. Light is the theme. I picked up the charcoal pencil. Underneath that line, I wrote a new one, wedding, a place where no one has to ask permission to be present. I slept in the studio that night on the small cot in my office. I didn't want to go home. I wanted to be surrounded by my work, by the glass, by the tools. The next morning, I woke to the chime of a new email. I squinted at the screen, my body stiff. It was from the Sunbelt Arts Trust. My stomach dropped. I was expecting a problem, a delay, a budget cut. I opened it. Dear Ms. Parker, it read. We are thrilled to inform you that the final budget adjustments for Belonging have been unanimously approved by the City Council. Your vision for the interactive lighting and the integrated audio has been met with extraordinary enthusiasm. We are cleared for full-scale fabrication, and we are officially confirming the public unveiling and dedication ceremony for Saturday, October 12th. I read the email and then I read it again. Unanimous approval, extraordinary enthusiasm, full-scale fabrication, October 12th. I stood up and walked to the main table where the master blueprints for the Belonging dome were unrolled. It was a massive, public, permanent installation. A celebration of my work. My name, Avery Parker, would be on a bronze plaque. I looked at the contract. Then I looked at my sketchbook. Wedding, no compromise. A place where no one has to ask permission to be present. Public unveiling. October 12th. The two ideas, separate until this moment, suddenly fused. They clicked together with the same definitive metallic *tack* as a drop of hot soda. Why would I ever again ask for a seat at their table when the city was giving me an entire plaza? Why would I fight to be a muted guest at their private ceremony when I could host my own public one and make the light itself the main attraction? I grabbed my sketchbook. The idea was coming so fast I could barely get it down. I would attach my wedding to the public unveiling. The ceremony wouldn't be before the art, it would be part of the art. My union with Evan would be the first official act of belonging in the dome dedicated to that very idea. My family was so terrified of what people would think. They were so afraid of a risk factor being seen. I smiled. A slow, sure smile that started in my chest and finally reached my face. Okay, I whispered to the empty studio. If they are so afraid of what people will think, let's invite the people. Let's invite the whole city. I would stop fighting for a place in their photographs. I would make my wedding, my art, and my life so visible, so public, and so full of light that it would be, in its own way, the only picture that mattered. I would make their gaze, the what will people think. The very medium of the art itself. The plan to merge the wedding with the unveiling of Belonging was a wildfire in my mind. It was terrifying and exhilarating. It was no longer a vague idea, it was a logistical challenge, an artistic statement, and an act of personal reclamation, all fused into one. I spent the next 2 days buried in blueprints, modifying the lighting sequences with Joy, discussing structural loads with Lena. The work grounded me. That evening, Evan found me at the light table, squinting at a wiring diagram. He didn't say anything, just gently took the charcoal pencil from my hand and set it down. Come on, he said. You need to see the sky. You've been staring at light bulbs for 48 hours. I was too tired to argue. I followed him as he bypassed the front door and headed for the steep, narrow stairs that led to the studio's flat roof. The metal door groaned in protest as he pushed it open, and the evening hit us. The Solterra sky at dusk was a masterpiece. The sun had just dipped below the distant mesa, leaving the heavens bruised with violet, magenta, and a final, searing slash of orange. The air was cool and smelled of creosote and dust. Evan had been here before me. From the rusted scaffolding that edged the roof, he had strung dozens of small, thin glass chimes. They were my rejects. The slivers and offcuts of colored glass I deemed too small or too imperfect for a commission. He had drilled tiny holes in each one and strung them on invisible filament. In the gentle desert wind, they were tinkling softly, a fragile, glassy music that sounded like scattered light. "You saved these," I whispered. They were beautiful. A curtain of fractured color against the deepening sky. "I like the scraps," he said, his voice quiet. He walked over to the edge, looking out over the sprawling, quiet city. "They've got more character." I stood next to him, and we listened to the chimes. It wasn't a grand romantic gesture. It was this. It was quiet. It was him seeing the beauty in the pieces I had thrown away. He turned to me, his face lit by the last of the ambient light. He reached into the pocket of his jeans. He didn't kneel. He didn't have a velvet box. He just opened his hand. Resting in his palm was a ring. It was simple, a band of brushed silver, but etched into its surface, deep and definite, was a pattern. It was the fractal pattern of a crack in a sheet of glass. The beautiful, chaotic way light breaks when a stone hits it. I stared at it. "I was going to wait," he said, his voice a low rumble. "But this week, what you're doing, what you've decided, you are not a risk factor, Avery. You are the whole damn essential point." He didn't ask me to marry him. He just held out the ring. "I thought," he said, his thumb gently tracing the etched line. "Broken light is still light. In fact, it's how you know it's real. It's how the spectrum gets in." My throat closed. This was not a proposal that asked me to be a wife. This was a statement that saw me as an artist, as a person. He wasn't offering me a safe harbor for my family. He was offering to be the lens that helped me focus my own light. I held out my left hand. My fingers were stained with patina. My nails short and uneven. He slid the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. The metal was cool against my skin. "Yes," I said. It was the only word I needed. He kissed me. It was not a cinematic, desperate kiss. It was a kiss of agreement. It was the seal on a contract, the solder on a final joint. It was a promise of no compromise. We sat on the roof for a long time, the glass chimes singing around us. We talked about the wedding, not about colors or flowers, but about the feeling. "Small," I said. "Even if the whole city is there, the ceremony itself, it needs to be real and public." He added, "No hiding, no back corners, no part of you or us is going to be tucked behind a pillar. No secrets." I agreed, twisting the ring on my finger. The etched lines felt like a familiar texture, like the tools of my trade. "Honest? We do it in the light." The next morning, I felt a calm I hadn't felt in years. The decision was made. The path was clear. I sat at my computer. The plans for belonging were open on one screen. On the other, I opened a new email. I typed in the addresses, my mother, my father, Grant, Miles, my aunts, the whole Preston Ellison list. I didn't agonize over the wording. I didn't play their corporate chess. I just wrote the truth. To my family, I wrote, "Evan and I are getting married. The ceremony will be on the evening of Saturday, October 12th, in Solterra. It will be part of the public unveiling of my art installation, Belonging, in the new city plaza. It would mean a great deal to us if you were there to celebrate with us. We would love to have you come exactly as you are." I stared at that last line, "exactly as you are." It was the invitation I had been waiting my entire life to receive. And in the end, I had to be the one to send it. I hit send. The silence that followed was familiar. For 3 days, nothing. I knew they were talking. I could picture the email chains, the frantic phone calls. What is she doing? A public spectacle. Is this an attack? The official reply, when it came, was from Vivian. As expected, Avery, your father and I have received your news. This is all very sudden, and the nature of the event is frankly confusing. A public art show is not a wedding. The family will consider attending, but we must be realistic. We cannot in good conscience lend our support to something that feels so unstructured. We would need to discuss adjustments. Your hair, your attire, and frankly, the art itself would need to be reviewed to ensure it is appropriate for a wedding ceremony. We cannot have a circus. Perhaps you and Evan could have this public moment for your work and then have a small, private, and more traditional ceremony with the family afterward. A place where we can all be comfortable. I read it. Adjustments. Appropriate. A circus. Comfortable. A second email dinged. A reply all from my father. Arthur adding his own punctuation to Vivian's message, Avery. Vivian is right. Think of the pictures. Think of the precedent. What will this look like? Think of the pictures. His lifelong obsession. I took a deep breath. I felt the dry desert air fill my lungs. I felt the solid weight of the silver ring on my finger. There was no anger. There was no pain. There was just clarity. The glass had been scored. I hit reply all. Mom and Dad, I wrote, thank you for your response. I understand your position, but the invitation is not negotiable. There are no adjustments to be made. This is our wedding. The art is the wedding. Evan and I are the wedding. There are no conditions here. You are invited as you are. If you are not comfortable coming, I truly, completely understand. We will miss you. But we will understand. With love, Avery. I sent it. I closed the email client. I turned to Lena and Joy. All right, I said, my voice clear. Let's talk about the final load test for the central dome. I had work to do. I didn't expect to hear from any of them again. I had drawn my line. They had theirs. We were, I assumed, at an impasse. 4 days later. A piece of mail arrived. It was not a bill. It was not a catalogue. It was a single, square envelope of thick, heavy cardstock. It was pale lilac, a color I hadn't seen in years. The return address, in an elegant, shaky script, was simply, Eloise Preston, Hawthorne Ridge. My grandmother. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, there was no pre-printed message, just a single sheet of matching lilac paper. My dearest Avery, she had written. What a wonderful, brave idea. Your grandfather, you know, wanted to be an architect, but his family insisted he go into banking. He spent his whole life drawing blueprints for what if. Don't let your life be a what if. I am coming. I have already booked my flight. And I have just purchased a new dress for the occasion. It is the brightest color I own. I believe it is called dragon fruit. I hope it is not too muted for your circus. I cannot wait to see your art. All my love, B.A. I sat down on my studio stool, the letter clutched in my hand. I read it again. I am coming. My brightest color. Dragon fruit. A tear I hadn't realized I was holding back slid down my cheek. Then another. This was not the thin, angry crying of my past. This was a flood of pure, unadulterated relief. It was joy. This was it, The first unequivocal, unconditional yes from my bloodline. One person was willing to step out of the beige frame and stand with me in the light. One person was willing to come as she was, in all her dragon fruit-colored glory. Evan walked in as I was wiping my eyes. He saw the letter, saw my face. "Good news?" he asked. "The best," I whispered, handing him the card. He read it, and a wide, beautiful smile spread across his face. "Dragon fruit," he said. "I like her already." He looked around the studio, at the massive, half-finished panels for belonging leaning against the walls. He looked at the chaos of our work, at the beauty we were building. "You know," he said, tapping the hands that hold light photos pinned to the wall, "our wedding pictures shouldn't just be for us. They should be part of this, part of the exhibition." I looked at him, catching his thought. "Marriage is a living art, Avery," he said, his eyes bright with the idea. "It's a craft. It's a process. It's not a static, perfect, timeless photo. It's like your glass. It's messy and it's hard and it holds the light. Why just get married under the art? Why not make the marriage the act of it, the first piece in the collection?" The final piece clicked into place. This was the answer. We would have the ceremony directly under the central oculus of the belonging dome. We would invite the city. We would invite our friends. And we would invite my family, with no conditions. The unveiling of belonging would not just be the debut of an art piece. It would be the debut of our union. The photographs Evan took would not be hidden in a private album. They would be projected, a living part of the exhibit, a testament to the idea that to belong means to show up fully and be celebrated for it. The plan was set. It was no longer a reaction. It was a creation. The plan was no longer a secret. It was a production schedule. The moment I merged my wedding with the Public Art Commission, Sunspoke Glass ignited. The studio, which had always been busy, now became a 24-hour hub of fabrication. The air was a constant, high-pitched scream of diamond grinders, the sharp snap of scoring tools, and the hiss of soldering irons. Lena, Joy, and I were running on adrenaline, caffeine, and the sheer, terrifying thrill of the deadline. October 12th was no longer just a date, it was a destination. We were deep in the logistical phase, coordinating with city engineers, rigging the complex lighting grids, and finalizing fabrication on the massive botanical panels. Joy was managing the timelines, while Lena oversaw the welding of the steel armatures that would support the dome. My role was artistic oversight, and that included migrating 2 decades of digital files, sketches, contracts, invoices to the new secure server the Sunbelt Arts Trust required for the project. It was a tedious, mind-numbing task. I was 3 hours into it, my eyes burning, sorting through ancient, poorly labeled folders on my old hard drive, when Lena called out from her own workstation. "Avery," she said, her voice sounding strange, hesitant. "I'm cleaning up your old server archives to migrate the belonging contracts, like you asked, but I found this weird password-protected folder." The password was just Hawthorne. I thought it was old vendor contracts or something. I walked over, rubbing my eyes. "What is it?" "It's an email archive," Lena said, turning to look at me, her expression unreadable. "A folder just called Family Events. I thought it was your planning, but these aren't, Avery." "What is this?" She clicked on a file. It was an email chain. The subject line read, "Regan's wedding seating." My blood went cold. "Read it," I said, my voice quiet. Lena swallowed. Her eyes scanned the text. It's from your father to your mother and Grant. It says, must ensure Avery is not near the front. Family photos are a priority. Seat at table 19. It's behind the pillar. We can't risk a mood this time. Instruct the photographers. No close-ups during the reception. A wave of nausea hit me. I leaned against the table. Show me the rest. She clicked another. And another. And another. And another. It wasn't just one wedding. It was all of them. A decade of my life. Meticulously documented in logistical, cold corporate language. Rechristening toast. Under no circumstances is Avery to be given the microphone. We don't need a performance. Re-Thanksgiving. Assign Miles to run interference if she starts talking about her art to the children. Keep the conversation light. Re-arrival protocol. Hawthorne Club. Vivian, please check her outfit upon arrival. Have a wrap ready if she is displaying again. They weren't just excluding me. They were managing me. I was a risk, a mood, a performance to be contained. These weren't the words of people hurting a child. This was the calm, calculated prejudice of adults strategizing how to keep their polished image intact. It was the risk factor, email again and again in a dozen different fonts. Avery, Lena said, her voice soft and angry. This is evidence. I stared at the screen. My first white-hot instinct was primal. Burn them. Burn them all to the ground. I had the receipts. I had the proof. I could take these emails, blow them up, etch them into glass, and hang them in the center of the plaza for the entire city, for my entire family, to see. I could make belonging an exhibit of my prosecution. I must have said it aloud. I'm going to use them, every last word. I had the receipts. I had the proof. I could take these emails, blow them up, etch them into glass, and hang them in the center of the plaza for the entire city, for my entire family, to see. I could make belonging an exhibit of my prosecution. I must have said it aloud. I'm going to use them, every last word. Evan had walked in holding a bag of takeout, and had stopped, sensing the temperature drop in the room. He came up behind me, read the screen over my shoulder, his hand found mine, his grip tightening. You could, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. And no one in this room would blame you. I looked at him, my eyes blazing. I should. They want to see what people will think. Let's show them. You absolutely should, Joy added from her desk, her voice sharp. That is sociopathic. That's not family. That's management. But Evan said, turning my chin to face him, forcing me to meet his gaze, but what is the goal? Is it to hurt them? Or is it to tell your truth? Because those two things are not always the same. I recoiled. It's the same thing. Their words are my truth. No, he said, his voice gentle but firm. Their words are their prison. Your truth is how you got out. If you just project this poison, you're letting them write the script for your wedding. You're just reacting. This whole thing, belonging. It has to be about you, not about them. He was right. I hated that he was right. If I just displayed their cruelty, I was still letting them be the subject. I was still behind their pillar, just screaming about it. So, what do? I whispered. You don't ignore it, he said. You abstract it. You use the feeling, not the specifics. You take the power back. He's right. Legally, a new voice cut in. We all turned. Paige Terrell, our art lawyer, was standing in the doorway, here for her weekly check-in on the city contracts. She was sharp, wearing a linen suit, and missed nothing. She gestured to the screen. That's libel, Avery. You use their names, you use their identifiable emails in a public, city-funded art piece, and you'll be in court for defamation before the solder cools. She walked over, reading the screen with a practiced, dispassionate eye. I can't do anything, I said, the fight draining out of me. I can't say that, Paige said, a small, sly smile playing on her lips. I said you can't identify them. You can't use the full quotes, but the phrases, tone it down. Cover up. Don't make a scene. Those are yours. You can't libel someone with a concept. You just need to practice good redaction art. Think of it as a classified document. You're redacting all the specifics, leaving only the systemic, anonymous cruelty. Honestly, it's more powerful that way. It's not my mother wrote this, it's this was written. It makes it universal. A spark. The one-eyed had before returned, a universal truth. I walked to my drafting table. Redaction art, I said. I grabbed my charcoal. Not an attack, a statement. I started writing the words, the phrases, please cover up. Tone it down. Neutral only. Don't pull focus. What will people think? A circus. Risk factor. They were ugly. A wall of negation. This is still their story, I said, frustrated. It's just a list of their insults. Joy came over, peering at the sheet. Maybe, she said, tapping the words. But what if it's not the last word? What if it's just the first layer? Joy, my technical genius, what do you mean? I've been experimenting with thermochromic enamels, she said, her eyes lighting up. Paints that change with temperature. What if we design panels using these words? Tone it down, but we design them so the light, our light, transforms them. The idea hit me like a physical blow. Yes, I said. Yes, we cut the letters. We play with the typography. I grabbed a new sheet. I wrote, tone it down. Then beneath it, I wrote, own it now. Joy, I said. Look, the letters are almost all there. ONETOWN. Her fingers flew over her keyboard. We can do this, she said. We screen print the negative phrase, tone it down, onto a panel using a dark, semi-translucent enamel, but we use a deeper, permanent etching underneath it to create the positive phrase, own it now. In the ambient light of the plaza, all the audience will see is the dark, negative phrase. It will look somber, almost like a memorial, but then at the climax, our climax, we hit it with a high-intensity angled spotlight. And what happens? I breathed. The dark enamel, tone it down, will be overwhelmed. She said, the light will pass right through it, but the etching, the own it now, will catch the light from that specific angle. The negative words will disappear, and the positive ones will ignite, blazing out. It's a magic trick. It's a reveal. We would do it for all of them. Please cover up would transform into please show up. Neutral only would become be only you. Risk factor would blaze into rise. This was it. This was the answer. This was not revenge. This was alchemy. The work took on a new sacred meaning. We weren't just building a dome. We were building a machine of transformation. 2 weeks before the wedding, Eloise arrived. I flew into the tiny Solterra airport, and I picked her up. She emerged from the gate like a tropical bird, a tiny, frail woman in a spectacular, flowing dress of the brightest possible pink. Dragon fruit, she said, beaming as I hugged her. I told you I drove her straight to the studio. She walked in, her eyes wide, taking in the chaos, the massive panels, the sparks from Lena's welding torch. My goodness, she whispered. You are building a cathedral. She walked over to the new text panels, which were leaning against the wall, unlit. She squinted, reading the dark, somber words, tone it down. Please cover up. She reached out a small, wrinkled hand and touched the glass. Oh, she said, her voice soft. They are still using the same old words. I looked at her, surprised. When I was a girl, she said, my mother, your great-grandmother, was obsessed with posture. Walk straighter, Eloise. Speak softer. Ladies, do not laugh from the belly. I spent the first 30 years of my life trying to be smaller, quieter. I was so good at it. I almost disappeared. She looked at me, her eyes as clear as glass. I am so glad you are bad at it. I felt the sting of tears. "B.A., I said, would you tell me those stories? I have an audio element for the installation. I'd love to record you, if you're comfortable." "Comfortable?" She laughed. "Dear, at 87, comfortable is my least favorite word. Get the machine." We sat in my office, and with her full, enthusiastic consent, I recorded her. For an hour she spoke of her life, of the pressures of being a Preston, of the joy of finally buying a dragon fruit dress. Her voice was warm, witty, and utterly without self-pity. We would edit it, weave it with soft music, and play it on a gentle loop in the entryway to the dome. She had one more thing. "I brought this for you," she said, pulling a box from her luggage. "They told me it was too intricate for my own wedding, too much lace, too showy. Perhaps it will be just right for yours." She opened the box. Inside, folded in blue tissue paper, was a magnificent, floor-length vintage lace veil. It was intricate, handmade, and breathtaking. "B.A., I can't." "Nonsense," she said. "Use it, cut it up, hang it from the ceiling. It's just material. Make it filter the light." And I knew exactly where it would go. It would be the canopy, the chopper, the sacred space under the central oculus, filtering the desert sun for our ceremony. Evan, moved by Eloise's recording, felt the project shift. "This isn't just your story, Avery," he said to me that night. "It's not just your grandmother's, it's everyone's." The next day, he took his camera. He didn't go to City Hall. He went to our community. He filmed the tattoo artist at Cinder Plus Sage. My family told me, the artist said, his hands covered in ink, that my body was a temple and I had covered it in graffiti. I told them I just chose a different kind of stained glass. He filmed the vegan chef. My father still calls my food rabbit chow. He refuses to eat it, so I opened a restaurant that feeds 500 people a day. He filmed the choreographer. My teacher told me I didn't have a ballet body, she said. She was right. I have a dance body, and I'm teaching a new generation of girls that everybody is a dance body. He filmed a progressive pastor from a church downtown, a woman who had officiated a gay wedding and faced protests. They told me to preach the word, not the world, she said, smiling. As if the word wasn't meant for the world. He cut the interviews into a beautiful, gentle 5-minute film loop titled The Too Much Club. I stood in the studio just days before the wedding and looked at the components, the transforming text panels, the audio of Eloise's voice, the film of our community, the lace veil ready to be hung. The emails Lena had found were locked away. I didn't need them. I had taken their power, their poison, and with my community, I had built an antidote. This was not a trial. It was a testimony. The installation was not an act of revenge. It was an act of translation, turning the pressure to conform into a public, defiant, and joyful celebration of belonging. The alchemy was one thing, the engineering was another. The moment the Sunbelt Arts Trust officially signed off on the combined event, the belonging unveiling and the Parker Calder ceremony, the new addendum read, the timeline collapsed. What was once a theoretical artistic deadline became a hard, immovable logistical wall. October 12th. We had 6 weeks. The studio transformed from a creative space into a high-stakes fabrication shop. Lena was running the welding team 24 hours a day, the shower of sparks visible from the street. Joy was a blur of motion between her CAD station and the plaza, managing the city contractors, and the structural engineers. My first battle was not with my family, but with municipal bureaucracy. Paige Terrell and I sat in a beige, fluorescent-lit office at City Hall, facing a zoning commissioner, who was staring at our application with profound confusion. "A permit," he said, tapping the paper. "For a community wedding. Plural, or is it yours? And it's inside the art." "It is a combined event, Commissioner," Paige said, her voice smooth as polished steel. "The art installation, Belonging, is about community integration. The wedding of the artist, Ms. Parker, and her partner, Mr. Calder, will be the inaugural act within that community space. It is, in itself, a piece of performance art, open to the public." He was not convinced. "It just sounds messy. What's the liability?" "You're inviting the whole city to a wedding." "We are inviting the city to an art unveiling," I clarified, leaning forward. "And as part of that unveiling, we are demonstrating the installation's core purpose, which is belonging. The ceremony is for us, but the space is for everyone. It's legal. It's insured, and it's fully funded by the trust." He sighed, stamped the paper with a dull thud, and pushed it across the table. "Fine, but any noise violations and the plug gets pulled. One night only. Plaza closes at 11 p.m. We walked out into the sharp Solterra sunlight. The permit clutched in my hand, Solterra Plaza Public Exhibition and Community Ceremony. It was real. That night, I was buried in vendor contracts. We needed sound. We needed cinematic lighting. We needed security. I sat with Paige, our art lawyer, my pen hovering over the signature line for the AV company. "This clause," I said, pointing, Article 5, confidentiality. "It's not strong enough." Paige peered at it. "It's a standard NDA, Avery. They can't share trade secrets." "That's not what I'm worried about," I said. I thought of the emails Lena had found. I thought of Eloise's audio recording. I want a clause that explicitly forbids the reproduction, distribution, or public discussion of any personal, familial, or biographical materials used in the audiovisual presentation. I want the art to speak for itself in that plaza on that night. I don't want audio clips of my grandmother's voice ending up on a podcast. I don't want screenshots of the text panels taken out of context. Paige looked at me, a slow, appraising look. "You're not just protecting the art, you're protecting them." "I'm protecting the message," I corrected her. "The message is transformation, not humiliation. I need that in writing." She nodded, took the contract, and began marking it up with a red pen. "I'll have it back to their legal department within the hour, ironclad." The next week was a blow of heavy machinery. Cranes lifted the massive steel armatures into place. Lena and her team, suspended in harnesses, welded the superstructure of the dome, fusing it to the plaza's concrete foundation. Then came the glass. My panels, my children, each one weighing hundreds of pounds, was carefully hoisted and slotted into place. The most terrifying night of the entire process was the lighting test. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The plaza was empty, cordoned off, the air was cold. Joy was at the main control board, her face lit by a dozen small screens. Lena was on a walkie-talkie with the rigging grips. Evan was beside me, his hand resting on my back. "Okay, Avery," Joy's voice crackled over the speaker system. "Ambient lights now." A soft, cool white light flooded the plaza. The dome was beautiful, but my eyes were fixed on the text panels. The dark, somber words, just as we designed them, "Tone it down. Please cover up. Neutral only." My stomach turned. Seeing them this big, this public, it was like seeing my own autopsy report. "It's so bleak," I whispered. "Wait for it," Evan said, his voice steady. "Avery, Joy called out. Are you ready for the sequence? I took a deep breath. Hit it, Joy. Executing sequence alpha in 3, 2, 1. The plaza was plunged into total darkness. A second of absolute silence. And then, with a single high-intensity spotlight filtered with a deep blood-red gel, it slammed into the first panel. It hit the glass at the precise 45 degrees angle Joy had calculated. The dark enamel of "Tone It Down" vanished, overwhelmed. The light passed through it, but the etched letters underneath, they caught the red light and blazed, seeming to ignite from within. Own it now. It was not a suggestion. It was a command, a blast of heat and color. Next, Joy yelled. The red light snapped off, plunging us back into darkness. Asterisk whump, asterisk a new light. A brilliant cobalt blue, hit the second panel. Please cover up evaporated. Please show up, exploded in its place. Whump. An amber light. Neutral only disappeared. Be only you burned against the night sky. Whump. 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 Risk factor became rise. A circus became ours. We ran the sequence 3 times. I was crying. Not tears of sadness. Tears of combustion. It worked. The magic trick was real. We had taken the ugliest words of my life and made them explode with light. Okay, I said into the walkie, my voice shaking. Okay, shut it down. It's perfect. The days that followed were about the softer details. The next morning, the installation team gathered under the central oculus. Lena, who had the steady hands of a surgeon, was on a scissor lift, gently unfurling Eloise's antique lace veil. She and her team suspended it, not flat, but in soft, cascading swags. Just below the opening, the harsh desert sun, which had been beating down, was instantly transformed. It filtered through the intricate, century-old lace, dappling the plaza floor in a pattern that looked like a million tiny, soft stars. It looked like a lapis lazuli sky. Our friend Rory, the baker Evan had interviewed for the Too Much Club, arrived. He wasn't just a baker, he was a structural engineer of sugar. He unveiled his final sketches for the cake. It was a 3-tiered marvel, not covered in flowers, but in cascades of delicate, sharp shards of pooled sugar, dyed in the same deep cobalts and ambers as the dome. It was designed to look like a beautiful, controlled fracture, a geode cracked open. It's stable, he assured me. But the point is that it looks like it's just on the verge of collapsing into something beautiful. It was perfect. While Rory and I discussed the cake, Joy was taping down colorful mats in a corner of the plaza, the Kids Create Light station. We had sourced hundreds of safe, non-toxic, polished edge mica sheets and acrylic jewels. There would be 2 child-safe light tables. It was a place for families, a place for children to play with light and color, completely separate from the high-voltage art. It was pure, uncomplicated joy, a necessary balance to the weight of the main exhibition. With the machinery in place, there was only one thing left to do. I sat at my desk and opened my email. I sent one final, round 3 invitation to the Hawthorne Ridge list. Subject, final details for October 12th. To my family, this is the last invitation. The invitation is, and always has been, unconditional. The ceremony and unveiling will begin at sunset, approximately 6 p.m., at Solterra Plaza. It is open to the public. Attached is a schedule of events. There is no assigned seating. There is no dress code. Please just come. We would love to have you. Love, Avery. I attached the simple PDF. 5 p.m. Plaza opens. Music. Kids Create Light Station active. 5:45 p.m. The Too Much Club film loop begins. 6 p.m. sunset. Ceremony of belonging. 6:30 p.m. The lighting of the dome. 7 p.m. celebration. I hit send. The response was exactly what I expected from my mother. Vivian, nothing. But my phone, sitting on the desk, showed the read receipt. She had read it. She was choosing silence over my father. Arthur, nothing. The email remained unopened, a denial of its very existence. Then, an accidental forward from my clumsy aunt, the one who always seemed to be my unintentional mole. She had forwarded me a chain clearly meant for a different recipient, a subject line, handling the Solterra situation, from Grant Ellison to Miles Ellison. Miles, are you seeing this? Open to the public. She's nuts. The city press will be there for the art. I'm telling you, if this thing looks showy or artsy, make sure we are not in the shot. It could reflect badly on the firm. This is a potential media disaster. Miles had replied, I know. Dad is livid. Mom is just not talking. Let's just stay on the edge. See how it plays in and out. I closed the email. They were coming. Not to celebrate, but to manage the media disaster. Not to stand with me, but to stand on the edge. I was about to shut down my computer when one last email pinged. It was from Eloise. My dear Avery, my flight lands at 9 a.m. on Saturday. I will be at the plaza with bells on and my dragon fruit dress. I am bringing a small something with me, a Preston heirloom of sorts, though I believe it truly belongs to you now. See you in the light, B.A. That was the final confirmation. The players were set. The stage was built. I slept that final week in 2-hour increments. I lived on coffee and the metallic taste of adrenaline. I would wake up in the dark, my heart hammering, and walk from my apartment to the studio, just to look out the window at the dark, silent dome in the plaza. Evan would find me there, a blanket in his hands. You're shaking, he'd say. I'm not scared, I'd reply, and it was the truth. I'm not scared of them at all. He'd wrap the blanket around my shoulders. I know, he'd say. It's the feeling you get right before you score a perfect line on a $500 sheet of glass. You can't breathe. He was right. I wasn't afraid. I was just ready. Ready to make the break. Ready to turn on the lights. The sun set on October 12th, and it was a spectacle. The desert sky does not fade politely. It puts up a fight, bleeding out in streaks of violent magenta and bruised purple before surrendering to the deep, clear indigo of night. As the light failed, the plaza ignited. It was no longer a construction site. It was a sanctuary. String lights draped between the newly planted trees cast a warm, golden glow. A low thrum of instrumental music, something with a cello and a driving, hopeful beat, drifted over the crowd. And there was a crowd. They came in waves. This was not a curated guest list. It was the city. I saw the crew from Cinder Plus Sage, the tattoo artist holding his young daughter's hand, the dancers from the Messerline Collective, and dozens of people I had never seen before, drawn by the music and the promise of the new illuminated structure. My community was there. Lena's entire sprawling family took up 3 whole benches, already passing around food. Joy was buzzing around with a headset, looking stressed and ecstatic. And in the front row, a beacon of defiant color, sat Eloise, her dragon fruit dress so bright it seemed to generate its own light. There was no dress code. The guideline had been, come as you are. And they had. The plaza was a living, breathing mosaic of denim, silk, crisp suits, and worn leather. I stood in the glass-walled alcove of the adjoining municipal building, waiting. My heart was not hammering. It was vibrating, a low, steady hum, like a massive transformer about to go live. Evan stood beside me. He was not a stranger in a rented tuxedo. He was himself. He wore a simple, beautifully cut vest of pale grey linen, his shirt sleeves rolled to his forearms, no tie, no pretense. He looked solid, real. And when he turned to me, his eyes were so clear and calm, I felt I could see my whole future in them. "You look like you," he said, his voice quiet. I looked at my reflection in the glass. The dress was a column of heavy, liquid white satin. It was simple, but I had spent a week on the overlay. A fine, almost invisible mesh was draped over the skirt, and sewn onto it were hundreds of paper-thin slivers of opalescent glass. They were my scraps. The offcuts from the dome itself, tumbled and polished until every edge was smooth like sea glass. With every tiny movement, I shimmered, catching the plaza lights, sounding faintly, softly, like wind chimes. My hair was its full turquoise. My tattoos, the vines and flowers that mapped my arms, were bare. Joy's voice crackled in a small earpiece I wore. "Avery, Evan, we'll live in 30 seconds. Evan took my hand. His was warm. "Ready to be truly you?" "I've never been more ready," I said. We walked out. The music swelled. And the crowd, this beautiful, strange, vibrant crowd, shifted. They didn't just part for us, they seemed to gather around us, creating an aisle. We stopped under the central oculus. Above us, Eloise's antique lace veil was suspended, filtering the bright plaza lights into a soft, dappled pattern on the floor like a canopy of stars. The mayor stepped up to the podium, her voice sharp and strong. "Good evening, Solterra. We are here tonight to dedicate a piece of public art, but this art, belonging, is not just glass and steel. It is an idea. An idea that a city is strongest, not when we are all the same, but when the unique individual light of every single person is respected, protected, and given the space to shine." She smiled, looking directly at me. "Tonight, the artist herself will demonstrate that idea. It is my profound honor to introduce our officiant, the Reverend Tamsun Hale." Tamsun, the pastor Evan had interviewed, stepped forward. She was radiant, her face lit with a joy that was almost explosive. "Friends, neighbors, what a night. We are not in a traditional church. We are in a church of the open sky. We are here to witness two people make a sacred promise to never, ever stand in each other's light." The plaza grew quiet. Evan turned to me. He hadn't written anything down. His voice was for me, but the microphone carried it. "Avery Parker," he began, and my name in his voice felt like the first honest word I'd ever heard. "My whole life, I've been a witness. I've watched the world from behind a lens. But watching you, that was different. Watching you fight for your light. Watching you build your world from the scraps no one else wanted. You didn't just teach me how to see. You taught me how to live." He took my other hand. "I see all of you, Avery. The fire, the fractures, the brilliant sharp edges. And it is the honor of my life. I will not be your shield. I will be your lens. And I promise today and all days, I will never, ever ask you to be smaller." My throat was thick. I gripped his hands, the silver ring on my finger cool against his skin. "Evan Calder," I said, my voice shaking just a little. "You found me when I was a collection of broken pieces. When I was sure I was a risk factor, but you never tried to fix me. You never tried to sand down my edges. You just sat on the floor with me and admired the way the light came through the cracks. You taught me that my scars were not flaws. They were the lead lines, the structure that held me together. You didn't ask me to change. You just asked, how truly *** do you want to be?" My answer today and forever is this. I promise I will never ask you to be silent in the face of your own beautiful, singular, and essential truth. "And now," Tamsun said, her voice warm, "the rings." There was a perfect, awkward beat of silence. Tamsun looked at us, confused. Evan just smiled and gave a short, sharp whistle. A ripple of laughter moved through the crowd. And then, bounding down the aisle, his tail wagging so hard his entire body shook, came Barnaby, our scruffy, one-eared rescue mutt, ecstatic to be the center of attention. Tied to his collar, with a white ribbon, was a small silver pouch. He skidded to a halt at Evan's feet, tongue lolling, and the entire plaza erupted in affectionate, gentle laughter. Evan knelt, untied the pouch, and scratched Barnaby's ear. "Good boy." He handed me a simple, wide band of brushed silver. I took the matching band from the pouch for him. "Avery," Joy's voice whispered in my earpiece. "Cue audio. Cue lights." Now, as Evan slid the ring onto my finger, the bright white plaza lights faded. A new light, a deep, warm amber, washed over the dome, coating everything in the color of ancient, preserved honey. And then, woven into the music, a voice filled the plaza. It was Eloise. Her voice clear, witty, and full of life from the audio recording we had made. "Being yourself," she said, her voice blanketing the crowd. "Truly, unapologetically yourself. Well, that is the greatest gift, the biggest, brightest gift of all." I was crying as I slid Evan's ring onto his finger. Then, Tamsun declared, her arms spread wide, her voice warm, "By the power vested in me by the city of Solterra, and by a universe that loves light and courage and good dogs, I pronounce you a family. You may kiss." Evan's hands cupped my face, and the glass slivers on my dress chimed. The kiss was not a performance. It was a seal. It was a promise. It was an anchor. The crowd didn't clap, they roared. It was an explosion of sound, a release of pure joy. The music swelled, shifting into something celebratory and wild. We were led to the cake, Rory's masterpiece. It stood on a table, a three-tiered sculpture of fractured sugar glass. We were given a knife. "Right here," Rory pointed. "At the main seam, just press." We pressed together, and the cake did what it was designed to do. The outer facade of pale sugar shards didn't crumble. It split, cracking open cleanly, revealing an interior of breathtaking, vivid color, a deep dragon fruit magenta, veined with edible gold, a perfect, intentional fracture revealing the light inside. The night became a blur. We took pieces of cake. We hugged. We were passed from one smiling stranger to another. The Kids Create Lights station was chaotic. Children squealing as they held the colored mica sheets up to the lights. At some point, I found myself standing alone for a moment, just breathing. I looked down at my dress. I looked at my arms, the ink black against my skin in the amber light, and I realized not one person had stared. Not one person had whispered. No one had pulled me aside to offer me a pashmina. I was not too much. I was not pulling focus. I was just Avery, the artist, the host, the bride. I was breathing my own air. And no one, not one person, was asking me to cover up. I scanned the crowd, and my eyes found hers. Eloise. She was standing near the front, holding a tall flute of champagne. She was watching me. Tears were rolling unchecked down her ancient, powdered cheeks. She saw me looking and she didn't wipe them away. She just raised her glass to me. Her eyes, even from 20 feet away, looked like newly forged, clear glass. She wasn't crying because she was sad. She was crying because she was free. As the night deepened and the sky turned to true velvet, the dome lights dimmed, and the projectors Evan had set up whirred to life. His photo series, Hands That Hold Light, began to play on the flat white walls of the municipal building. There were no faces, no names, just my hands gripping a glass cutter. Lena's hands in heavy welding gloves holding a torch. Rory's hands dusted with flour. The tattoo artist's hands stretched taut, holding his needle. Eloise's hands, gnarled and jeweled, holding her teacup. A child's hands at the light table, holding a piece of red mica. It was an anonymous, communal portrait of creation, a testament to the hands that build, the hands that hold, the hands that are too much. This was not a wedding reception. This was not a timeless beige event. This was a festival, a joyful, chaotic, beautiful festival of kindness. The celebration was at its peak. The music was a joyful, rhythmic pulse. Evan and I were dancing, a clumsy, happy shuffle, surrounded by our friends and the strangers who had become our witnesses. The Hands That Hold Light photo series was looping on the wall, a silent, powerful testament. Then Joy's voice, no longer in my ear but at my side, tapped my shoulder. Her face was no longer ecstatic, but tight with apprehension. "Avery," she said, her voice low. 9 o'clock by the east entrance. "You need to see this." The music seemed to fade, the volume dipping as one song ended before the next began. In that pocket of relative quiet, I turned, and I saw them. They were not part of the crowd. They were observers of it, standing at the far edge of the plaza, just beyond the warm perimeter of the string lights, in the cool blue shadows. My family, Vivian, Arthur, Grant, and Miles. They had come. They had dressed the part, or their part. My father and my cousins were in dark, severe suits, not black tie, but formal. My mother was wearing a sheath dress of a deep, joyless navy. They were a solid, dark block of judgment against the vibrant, chaotic color of the celebration. They were not coming as they were coming as an embassy from another, colder world. My heart didn't sink. It didn't leap. It just solidified. It became a piece of cold, hard glass. I felt Evan's hand find mine, his grip instantly steadying. "I'm here," he whispered. I nodded. I let go of his hand. "I need to do this alone." He didn't argue. He just stepped back, a silent guardian. I walked toward them. The glass slivers on my dress chimed softly with every step. The only sound in the sudden hush that had fallen over my part of the plaza. I felt the eyes of the crowd on me, sensing the shift in temperature. I stopped 10 feet from them. My father's eyes ran over me. My dress, my hair, my bare inked arms. Her face was pale, her knuckles white as she clutched her small beaded purse. "Avery," she said, her voice a strained, sharp whisper. What is this? You turned your wedding into an exhibition." I looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, the sheer, unadulterated panic. She was not angry. She was terrified. "No, Mom," I said, my voice clear and calm. It didn't even shake. I turned my life into art, as I have always been doing. "Do you have any idea how many people are looking at you?" My father, Arthur, cut in. His voice was a low, angry growl. He gestured at the crowd, at the city officials, at the strangers. "This is a disgrace, a public spectacle." I smiled. It was a small, sad smile. "Yes, I do. It's wonderful, isn't it?" For the first time in my life, I invited them to look as if on cue. A low, thrumming sound began. It was Joy at the control booth. I caught her eye across the plaza. She nodded at me. It was time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Joy's voice boomed over the plaza, bright and professional. "Thank you for joining us to celebrate belonging. And now, the moment we are here for, we present the lighting of the dome. The plaza lights, the warm string lights, the ambient amber, all of it snapped off. We were plunged into absolute, shocking darkness. The crowd gasped. My family, in the shadow, was invisible. I was invisible. A single white spotlight hit me, standing alone in the center of the pavement. I could feel my mother's horror. We dedicate this piece, Joy's voice continued, to anyone who has ever been told they are too much. To anyone who has been asked to be smaller, quieter, or less. And then the sequence began. Asterisk womp dot asterisk the first panel to my right ignited in that searing blood-red light. The dark, somber words, tone it down, vanished, and the blazing etched command. Own it now punched through the darkness. Womp. The cobalt blue light. Please cover up evaporated. Please show up burned in its place. Womp. The amber light. Neutral only was annihilated. Be only you sang out. My family was frozen. They were watching a slideshow of their own private vocabulary. Their family event protocol transformed into a public, defiant creed. Vivian's hand went to her mouth. She recognized the cadence. She recognized the words, but they were anonymous. They were universal. They were everyone's. Womp. Risk factor became rise. I watched my mother flinch. That was her word. She knew it. But there was no proof. There was no email. There was only the art reflecting the truth. As the text panels held their blazing positive light, Eloise stepped out from the crowd. She was no longer a guest, she was a participant. She walked past my family, her dragon fruit dress like a torch, and came to stand beside me in the spotlight. You forgot one, dear, she said, her voice quavering but strong. She turned to me, holding a small leather-bound box. The Preston family heirloom. She opened it. Inside, there were no jewels. There was no lace. There were papers, a legal document. This is the Eloise Fund for Belonging, she announced, her voice picked up by the microphone I still wore. I have established a small trust in my name. It will be managed by Sunspoke LLC, and its entire purpose, she looked at me, her eyes wet, is to provide scholarships for young artists who have been told to be less, so they can have the tools to be more, so they can build their own cathedrals. She handed me the box. Then she turned. She looked directly at her daughter, at my mother. Vivian, she said, her voice echoing across the silent plaza. I was silent for far too long. I let your father and his father and this idea of honor make me small. And then I stood by silently while you tried to do the same to her. My silence was my sin. No more. A ripple of applause started. It was not a roar. It was not a cheer. It was a soft, steady wave of snaps and claps. It was the sound of affirmation, the sound of a community witnessing a truth. Vivian was shaking. Her carefully constructed composure was shattering, just like the cake. I. She stammered, looking at me, desperate. I was just afraid, Avery. I was afraid they would judge you. I was just trying to protect you. The words hung in the air, the final broken defense. I looked at her, and for the first time, I felt no anger. I just felt a profound, aching pity. And I appreciate that, I said, my voice gentle. But you can't. Don't you see? I don't need you to protect me from the light by keeping me in the shadows. Evan came up beside me then, and his hand found mine. He didn't say a word. He just stood with me, a solid, warm presence in the spotlight. My father, Arthur, looked apoplectic. He was speechless, his jaw working, his entire code of conduct violated. He had come to manage a media disaster, and he had become the silent audience for a new narrative. Joy, sensing the moment, walked over and quietly handed him a program for the event, the one every guest had received. He glanced down at it, his face rigid. I knew what he was reading. The line we had printed at the very bottom, under the schedule, in this plaza, there are no back seats. All who attend are the main characters of their own story. He looked at the program. He looked at me, the main character. He looked at the blazing text panels. Miles, my cousin, took a physical step backward, pulling himself into the deeper shadow, away from the light. He wanted no part of this. He was in and out. Grant just stared at the ground, his face pale, his expression unreadable. He just looked down. My mother, Vivian, held my gaze for one last, agonizing moment. Her face was a mask of grief and confusion. She had lost her protection, her control, her entire system. It was useless here. Slowly, she turned. She did not say goodbye. She just gathered the tatters of her dignity, and walked stiffly out of the plaza, and into the dark street. My father, after a moment's hesitation, turned and followed her. Grant and Miles fell in line behind him. A small, dark procession retreating from the light. I watched them go. I felt the final tether snap. She'll be back, Eloise whispered, patting my arm. Or she won't. But you are here. She hugged me, her small, frail body strong. She hugged me, and she stayed. Joy, I said, my voice clear. The finale. You got it, boss. You got it, boss. Joy's voice sang out. The text panels faded. The plaza was dark for a single, held breath. And then the final, central oculus of the dome ignited. A massive, high-wattage beam shot down, hitting Eloise's lace veil, shattering into a million points of starlight on the plaza floor. And etched into the central lens, a word I had added at the last minute, a final dedication. The light projected it onto the floor at our feet, a swirling galaxy of letters, unforgettable. The crowd roared, the music exploded. The night and the light were ours. That final, blazing word, unforgettable, seemed to hang in the air for a long moment, projected onto the very ground we stood on, and then, as if that word were the cue, the music, which had been atmospheric and tense, did not just return. It erupted. It was a wave of pure, percussive joy, a beat that you felt in your chest. The tension that had held the plaza in a state of suspended animation snapped. The crowd let out a collective whoop, and the celebration poured back into the space 10 times stronger than before. The children, who had been watching the confrontation with wide, silent eyes, shrieked with delight and ran from their parents' legs back toward the Kids Create Light station. They were just kids playing. They ran, fearless and laughing, through the colored pools of light, their small shadows dancing across the plaza, utterly unconcerned with the adult drama that had just unfolded. They were just happy to be in the light. Joy, seeing her cue, handed me the wireless microphone. I hadn't prepared a speech. My hands were shaking just slightly from the adrenaline. I looked at Evan, who nodded, his eyes shining. I raised the mic. Thank you, I said, my voice carrying over the plaza. Thank you all for being here, for being part of this. I mean it, I said, and my voice was suddenly clear as glass. Because of them, I learned the hard way how to find the right people to stand beside. I learned that you should never, ever have to apologize for the space you take up. My eyes found Lena and Joy, who were hugging by the control booth. I looked at Rory, who was cutting his fractured glass cake. I looked at Tamsun and the tattoo artist and the dancer, my community. And thank you, I said, my voice softening, to all of you, to the city of Solterra for showing up tonight exactly as you are. You have proven the entire thesis of this art. This light is yours too. The plaza didn't just clap. They cheered. It was a roar of affirmation. I let the mic drop to my side. Eloise came up and took my hand, the one that wasn't holding the microphone. Her small, wrinkled fingers were surprisingly strong. She squeezed. Your grandfather, she whispered, her voice thick. He would have been so proud of this cathedral. And I I am so proud of you, Avery, in a way that doesn't require a single stitch of hiding. Her words were the final, perfect seal of approval. I didn't need it from my mother or my father. This was the matriarch. This was the blessing that mattered. Then Evan was there. He didn't say anything. He just wrapped his arms around me from behind, his hands covering mine, pulling me back against his solid, warm chest. He buried his face in my hair, and I leaned my head back against his shoulder. We just stood there for a long moment. The two of us at the center of the world we had built. The lights of the dome shifted, moving from the sharp primary colors of the reveal to a soft, blended palette, a deep, warm amber. The color of my first successful test panel washed over us, bathing us in the color of ancient light, of preserved memory. We were dyed in it. We did it, he whispered, his voice a low rumble against my back. No, I whispered back, my eyes on the crowd. We are it. The Sunspoke team, my team, rolled a large, empty glass vat into the center of the plaza near the cake. Next to it, they placed a barrel. It was filled to the brim with small, smooth, polished pieces of clear glass, like river stones. They were the remnants, the polished, safe-to-touch scraps from the belonging dome. Lena held up a simple, hand-painted sign, we built this dome from our stories. Add yours. Make a wish. They called it the wish glass. One by one, our friends and then strangers began to walk forward. They would dip their hands into the barrel, retrieve a single piece of polished glass, hold it in their palm for a moment, a silent wish, a thought, a promise, and then drop it into the large glass vat. Asterisk clink, clink, clink. Asterisk. It was the sound of my childhood wind chimes. It was the sound of my mother's disapproval. But here, it was different. It was the sound of a community adding their own light, their own pieces, to the whole. It was the sound of belonging being built, one piece at a time. I was watching a family, the parents and their two small children, all drop their pieces in when a woman I had never seen before approached me. She was maybe in her 50s, elegant, wearing a simple but beautiful dark blue dress. Her face was nervous, but her eyes were shining. Excuse me, she said, her voice so quiet I had to lean in. Miss Parker, I'm sorry to interrupt. I just needed to say something. Of course, I said. She took a shaky breath and gestured, not at herself, but at her own arms. They were bare. I have worn a cardigan, she whispered. Or a jacket to every single social event of my life, even in the middle of August. For 20 years, I have scars from an old accident. I was always told they were unseemly. I looked at her arms. The scars were pale and silvery in the amber light, like the etched lines on Evan's ring. Tonight, she said, and a tear rolled down her cheek. I came here. I saw your art. I saw you. And I left it. My coat. I left my coat in the car. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. This was the entire point. This was more important than the commission. More important than the confrontation. This was the alchemy. I reached out and gently touched her hand. Then this light, I said, my voice thick, is yours. It always was. She nodded, tears flowing freely now, and she just squeezed my hand, then melted back into the crowd. I was still reeling from her words when my phone, which I had forgotten was in the pocket of my dress, gave a single, soft vibration. I almost ignored it. An intrusion, but I pulled it out just to silence it. My heart tightened when I saw the sender on the lock screen. Grant Ellison. Not an accidental forward, not a group chat, a direct email sent 3 minutes ago. I stepped out of the amber glow into the cooler shadows at the edge of the plaza and opened it. The subject line was blank. The message was one single, solitary line, Avery, if you're willing, I'd like to talk. No conditions. I read the words and then I read them again. No conditions. The 2 words I had spent my entire adult life fighting to hear from them. This was not a victory. This was not forgiveness. This was not a happy ending with my whole family. My mother and father were gone. But this was a crack. It was a seed. It was the first tentative, possible step, not from the family, but from a person, from my cousin. I stared at the screen for a long, long time. I thought about what I would write back. I thought about the anger, the pain, the years of being behind the pillar. And then I took a deep breath. I turned the screen off. I slid the phone back into my pocket. Not tonight. Tonight was not about them. Tonight was not about the past, and it was not about the future. Tonight was about this, about the here and the now, the music, the laughter, the clink of the wish glass. I turned my phone off and I turned my face up. I looked at the dome, my dome, our dome. It was glowing against the black desert sky, a beacon. I saw the panels, the ones that had blazed with power, own it now. Please show up. Be only you. The words, the very words that had been used to build my cage, the phrases that had made me shrink and hide and doubt. They were no longer whispers in a hallway. They were no longer cold text in a private email. They were quite literally holding up the roof. They were permanent. They were etched in glass and fused with steel. They were the very patterns that formed my cathedral. And a thought, as clear and final as the ring on my finger, settled into my heart. Family is not a ticket to a wedding photograph. Family is not a group you are forced to shrink for. Family. Family is the light that doesn't ask you to dim. I must have smiled. I must have let out a breath that sounded like a laugh, because in that exact moment, Evan, who always had his camera, his third eye on his shoulder, turned and captured it. The click of the shutter was lost in the music, but I saw the flash. He lowered the camera, and I saw the look on his face. He knew he had gotten the shot. I knew what he had captured. He had captured the precise moment the knot was tied. My revenge was complete. It was not the scene in the plaza, the confrontation, the public validation. My revenge was not their humiliation. They had done that to themselves. My revenge was this, my joy. My revenge was my becoming. He had a photograph of me laughing, not because I had finally, at 32 years old, been accepted by them. He had a photograph of me laughing because I had finally accepted myself. And I realized with a profound, earth-shattering certainty that I no longer needed their permission. The lights of the plaza began to soften. The music shifted, moving from celebration to something slower, a gentle, resonant hum. The night was ending, not with a crash, but with a deep, satisfying chord. I stood in the center of my plaza under my dome. I closed my eyes for just a second, breathing in the smell of soda, and desert dust and champagne. When I opened them, I looked up at the very top of the oculus, at the central lens, the one that had projected the final word. In its dark, curved, reflective surface, I could see myself, a tiny, distorted, beautiful figure surrounded by light. The dome was reflected in my eyes. I was calm. I was bright. I was calm. I was bright.